This is Beekeeper Confidential, a show about the curious lives of bees and their beekeepers. I'm your host, Mandy Shaw. I met today's guest last September at a seminar taught by Tom Seeley. He had built a bee-catching box, much like the one described in Dr. Seeley's book, Following the Wild Bees. We got to talking, and I ended up inviting him to come and speak to Portland Urban Beekeepers about his experience using Seeley's methods for finding wild and kept colonies. And while he was in town, we got together in a pancake house parking lot to talk about bee lining, topo maps, turntables, and rebellious bees. Meet the president of the North Olympic Peninsula Beekeepers Association, Rex Roberton. So Rex, you are a beeliner, and you have an amazing property in the Olympic Peninsula where you can spend your days hunting bees. How does that work?
So it kind of started last summer. I was out looking in the garden and being up there for years and not seeing honeybees. I wasn't managing any hives. I had hives years ago in Montana, but I didn't have any hives up there and didn't know of any neighbors that had bees. And I just was so curious about, did I get it like a neighbor that's got bees now, or are there actually wild colonies? You know, I'd been reading Dr. Seeley's stuff, and you can actually do bee lining. And I built a box and started just catching bees and trying to figure out, how do you paint them? What do you do?
Yeah. So what is the box comprised of? Because like you can't just use a regular cardboard box. Like, describe the process and why do we need a box and what do we put in it to get the bees to come into it?
Okay. So actually, technically, you don't need a box. There's other ways to do it. You could take a glass with a piece of cardboard, go out and catch a bee in it. And if you knew how to do it, you could feed them, release them, and get them to come back. But the idea with the bee box is that it has two chambers. Each end of the box will open up. One end is the trap door, and you come up to a flower that has a bee on it. You get up to the flower, quickly shove it over the bee and the flower, and slam the door shut. So, right. So now you have a bee in that trap chamber, and then there's a slider that like a compartment divider that slides up, and so the bee could go into other side. So you open the door on the other side, but it's closed with glass, so it lets the light in and kind of tilt the box up, and the bees just go right to this second chamber. Then while you're looking in there so you don't squash the bee, you slide the chamber divider back down, so now you have a bee in the back chamber, and then you go and repeat. You just catch another bee. Usually you want to try to get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bees. So once you get the bees in there, so now what you want to do is feed them and release them. So you slide a little tray in there with what I use is a little lid that has marjoram flowers that I've kind of smashed down, and then put some sugar syrup down inside. So put that in there, cover it with a dark cloth, lift up the divider panel, and the bees go in and they find that syrup and they start drinking it up.
And it's so funny to me because I would think, I'm a bee, and then all of a sudden I've been abducted.
I know.
And now I'm in a dark, scary van,
right,
and they're feeding me syrup.
Yeah.
Would I drink the syrup?
Yeah.
I would think they would just be terrified and be trying to get out. But it's so interesting that, oh, hey, there's some free food in here. That's
right.
good.
Right.
And then what happens?
So they just like automatically start drinking it up. So then you open the door and release the bees. They'll come out and they kind of fly back and forth, usually not in a complete circle, but just back and forth, and they're orienting, looking around like where they're at, and they go back to the hive. And of course, they're going to do the waggle dance, and then they come back. So within a half an hour or an hour, it just depends on how strong the hive is and the distance and a lot of different things. You can end up with like really hundreds of bees right there. And
wow.
that happened. One of my main problems that I had last year was I was trying to find this colony that was nearby. It was only like a third of a mile from my property, but it was a real small colony. And there was a big, strong colony a mile away, and they were interfering with this whole project. So it took me 11 days to find this colony that was only really a matter of quarter mile to a third of a mile away.
Wow.
So...
And
yeah.
you're painting the bees as they, like, how are you keeping track of them?
Yeah, right. So once you do the release and you get them coming and going, you need to paint a few of them. So each one that you paint is individually marked, so you can use different colors.
Are we using like, what kind of paint is it?
Yeah, so
I'm not thinking like Krylon or something like
water-based acrylic is what I use, and you could use the markers that they make for marking queens. I guess I haven't done that yet, and a paintbrush, and they come back, and once they get settled and they're feeding and they're drinking up the syrup, they're pretty locked in to that. So if you come in real slow with fine paintbrush with the paint on it, you come in and either mark them on the thorax or on the abdomen. You have to be really careful because you don't want to get the paint on their wings. That's bad news if that happens. And so when I was first learning, I watched, of course, these videos with Dr. Seeley, and he is like an artist with this. I watched one, so he's sitting on one side of the box and the bee's over on the other side away from him, and he reaches way around to the other side and comes in and puts a dot. That's not easy to do because, again, you don't want it on their wings. So I started experimenting with a little turntable that was on the inside of the door. So I could turn it to the right direction, get them set up, and then I could just come in with my right hand real close and get them painted. That worked really well.
That's what the turntable is for. I was trying to figure that out. Okay. I mean, because they're not listening to beats in there.
Yeah, exactly. Also, when the bees are returning and you're trying to identify the ones that are marked, sometimes they land on the other side with their back away from you, and you can't tell, especially if it gets really crowded, because sometimes you could have like literally dozens of bees, like enough to cover the whole lid, the feeder, and then bees on top of them, and even bees on top of them, and that
bees on bees on bees.
Yeah, like 3 deep. Yeah. So you don't want that, and part of being inexperienced is that you don't want to spend too much time at one station to end up with too many bees, and because then it gets to be total chaos. And
so, like, maybe once you have a dozen or so bees,
that'd be perfect.
Then how do you decide which direction that you want to go into next? Like, if you have bees going from multiple directions, how do you decide?
Yeah, so that's what happened to me. I found out, and it took a while to figure this out, because initially I'm just within my own yard, learning how to paint and figure out, watching them. It's hard if there's big trees in the way, but trying to figure out, where they're going. But after several days of that, and then making some moves outside my property, I've discovered that there were 3 colonies feeding in my herb garden. And one colony was almost 2 miles away off to the east, and there was like no way I would even consider going. There was, because of the distance, you wouldn't want to try that. But then it was going through a lot of private property and then down into a really deep gorge where the Morris Creek drainage system goes through. So one colony off to the east, and initially I thought I was seeing some bees going to the west, so I thought, there's there's definitely some bees going that way. I can't tell for sure, but I moved a station outside of my property, and then neighbors gave me permission to go up to a clearing on their property. And from there, I discovered that they were going two directions, one to the northwest and one to the south. And so the one to the northwest was this little colony, and the one to the south was a big colony, possibly two colonies down there, like maybe a parent colony and one that was maybe 400 or 500 yards away. So,
how can you tell the size of the colony?
So I decided, okay, I'm going to go find the one that's close by. I mean, that made sense. Plus, when I got the first compass reading off of the big colony that was to the south and marked it out on the topo map, it put them way over in the Olympic National Park, right on the border of the park. And there was a very deep gorge there that talked to one of my neighbors, and he said he'd been in there and you'd have to have a rope to go down and,
oh, wow.
and get up. So I thought, well, that's not going to happen. But so I decided, okay, I'm going to go after this other colony. But the problem I had, and the way I figured this out is, I'd move out into this area. This is on Department of Natural Resources land that had been harvested maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So they don't really do clear cut now. They take most of the trees, but they leave, for the birds and different.
So is it more of a thinning out than?
It's not thinning. They're just trying to leave some stuff for different birds and animals, and they don't really care about honeybees because they consider that to be non-native species.
Oh.
So anyways, what I was starting to say is I'd make these moves up into there, and there were not very many bees going that direction, even though I know there's a line that has to go up there. And this interfering colony, they would be there in mass. And so I'm making these moves to the north. And even though this other colony, the big colony, is like almost a mile away, and I'm moving away from them, they're just gaining in number. And like I was saying earlier, you can have too many bees, and this kept happening to me. And so I'd get up in there, and I just get overwhelmed. And when it gets to the point where the feeder is totally full and no bees can get onto the feeder, then they're all over the place in the air. And then also the other thing is when recruits are coming, so the early bees have gone back and done the waggle dance, and they're sending out these recruits. And the recruits don't fly directly to you. They don't know where you're at. They got an idea where you're at, and they're doing a lot of scenting. So they might come out and be way off to, up the hill or down the hill. And so they're coming in from other directions following the scent. So it depends on the wind and all these different things. So it gets like total chaos. And so I'd get up in there and I'd be overwhelmed, and I just lose the beeline.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time I went up in there, I wasn't using the oregano flowers in the feeder. Traditionally, the bee hunters, they get old brood comb, and they put the syrup in there. And I didn't have any old brood comb, so I'm just trying to figure this out. I'd heard that bees can get diseases from brood comb, and I thought, well, that wouldn't be good. So I was just experimenting. So I tried using these little squares of sponge, and I moved up into there. And this was actually the second day. I thought, okay, I think there's some bees up that direction. I'm just gonna catch bees and take them up the hill and see what happens. And so I went way up in there. It was probably 400 or 500 yards, which is more than you usually really want to make in one move.
Oh.
But I made a release, and the bees, they oriented and disappeared. And I sat there, and it wasn't maybe even 3 or 4 minutes. And one bee came back, flew in front of the sponges and went kind of back and forth and just like, no, just
Oh.
disappeared. And later I realized, I found out when I found the colony that I was so close, I think I could have thrown a rock and hit the tree that they were in. And
do you think that they must have been really high up?
no, they weren't. No, they were in a dead Douglas fir that had kind of fallen against the hillside. It had split up high and fallen against the hillside and then rotted out inside. And they were actually at eye level when I found them. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
But yeah. So one time I went up there and I spent a whole day up in there. I mean, it seems ridiculous that it would take. And again, I got up in there and I was up again close enough that I could have thrown a rock and hit the tree.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually I was following a very weak line of bees and being overwhelmed again by this colony and the big colony from the park. And I passed the tree, so the line reversed. But I didn't know it because the line reversed right into this strong line of the bees from the south, the other colony. And though you could sit there, turn around, look to the south, and there's just like a steady stream of them. A lot of them were just coming in above the grass, and they just kind of doing a little scenting thing where they're on a little path back and forth, and narrowing in on the path. And it was getting late. The sun's starting to drop behind the mountain. I went up, decided I didn't want to try hiking out all the way back through that clear cut. It's pretty trashy in there. So there was a road I could get on. I got up above. I decided to set up one more station. And by then, but I think because it was late, I lost a lot of the bees from the south. They were like, late in the evening. The bees are not going to be going that far. They'll be nearby. So they were going home. And then I got a line that went down to the east that crossed right where I had been. So I knew, okay, they're down there. I know they're down there. I just got to get in there and figure it out. So I actually got a phone call. My mom had gone into the hospital, so I had to leave town for like a month.
Oh, no.
Right there, yeah.
Oh.
It was crazy. But so a month later, I came back and made another failed attempt, again, because being overwhelmed by this other colony. So then I decided, okay, I've got to get up in there with only bees from this DNR colony, no bees. So first I've been reading all of Dr. Seeley's books, and he has one that's kind of a textbook. I forget the name of it. But I remember he was reaching in and just picking up bees. And I thought, oh, you could do that? Yeah, good idea. One day I tried I had a couple bees marked that I knew were going up to the DNR, and all these other bees from the south. And so with baggies, I'd scoop up the bees from the other colony and toss them on the ground and keep doing that. I had a pile of about 8 or 9 bags of these bees.
Oh my gosh, this is just to keep them out of your box,
while I'm
so
waiting
you could
for
focus
this bee.
on the other bees.
It was crazy. And of course, I let them all go. No bees were injured in that failed experiment. And I caught one bee, only one, that was from the other colony. And I went to transfer him and made a mistake, and he flew away. I lost him.
Oh.
So the next day I thought, okay, plan B. I got my wife to come and help. And so she was kind of being my spotter, keeping track of, I got about 12 bees painted just really as fast as I could. And so as soon as I had a bee that come in like 7 minutes or 6 minutes, I knew that had to be from the colony that I was after, because the minimum time from the other colony was 9 minutes. They were using 9, 10, 11, 12 minutes. So as soon as I got a 7-minute bee, I just reached in, grabbed him, stuck him in a little container. I got 3 bees that way. So then the plan is take those bees up and get away from all these bees from the other colony and just do a release with those 3 bees.
Mm-hmm. And you're releasing them in the direction that you think that the colony is.
Well, I knew that those bees, just by the timing, when I was doing that capture. So that's the main thing that I was using. Because where I'm at right there, I've got DNR forest along my property, real high trees.
And
so,
DNR is
Department of Natural Resources.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, do not resuscitate.
DNR.
Do not resuscitate trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went to do the release over there with those 3 bees, and it started raining.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and then I wasn't completely thinking this out because I could have just brought them home and kept them warm.
Oh.
Because this is September and cool nights.
Yeah.
But I couldn't release them. I actually had them covered and ready to do the release, and it started raining, and it didn't quit, and I just couldn't let them go. So I just left them there. Well, one bee didn't survive that ordeal, but the other 2 did. So the next day, this is the next day I'm going out back, and they're kind of sluggish, and so it took about a half an hour for them to like wake up, and I kind of blew my breath on them, made them mad a couple of times, and they did. Those 2 finally came out, crawled around, and flew away. And about 4 minutes later, a bee showed up. It wasn't one of the painted bees. Those bees were painted. It wasn't one of those. I think they decided, hey, I've had a rough night.
I'm going to bed.
Yeah, bedtime. Where are the bees that go to sleep? I'm going over that section. So a bee showed up, and then a little later, a couple more bees showed up, and I had a line going. Only the DNR bees, no interference. Oh my gosh.
What was going through your mind? Were you completely freaking out?
Yeah, it was like exciting. It's like, this is totally different. It's like, why didn't I figure this out earlier? But so then this is a day that we had our club potluck. So I only had like a little time to get this going.
Damn obligations.
I know. So, but I got this line going. I think I made one move. And did the potluck, got back around 3, made another move, I think, and was building up. I probably had, a couple dozen bees going, which is, perfect, and not having any trouble moving up the line. But again, it's late, and then it started raining again. So, I kind of cover the box. You leave your box out at night, because when you leave, you want to fill it up, let the bees, can work as long as they can, and then they'll be back in the morning. They're probably there waiting for you when you come back in the morning, even, depending on the temperature. So, so it started raining, and I sat there for a half an hour, and several of these bees, I have a video of it on my YouTube. I called it The Rain Bees. For 30 minutes, these bees were going back and forth in the rain. And it was raining enough you could hear the rain when I listened to the recording. That's how much it was raining, and the bees looked wet. So I had to go home, got rained out, and end of the day.
Does that just totally bum you out for the rest of the day? Were you really crabby after that?
No, I was pretty excited because I was pretty sure like tomorrow's
the day.
Yeah.
Were you
day
able to
number
sleep?
11.
Day 11.
It takes 11 days
day.
to find for a beginner that doesn't know what he's doing. 11 days, but that counts the days where you're just learning how to paint.
Yeah.
And watching the bees and figuring out the bee line. So so the next day I went up there, talked my wife into coming with me. We went up in there. We made 2 moves. I was moving to the northwest. I made one move that passed, and this usually happens at the end of the hunt. You might just go too far because you don't know for sure. So the line reverses. So I got a really good station going, and obviously the line had reversed, and now it was southwest. So then it was just like get out and start walking around, and there weren't that many trees standing there. I was kind of puzzled about that. And down in this little draw, and I saw this dead Douglas fir. It was about 3 feet diameter at the base, a good sized tree. went over there, crawled up the hill, and got around the other side, and there the bees were just buzzing around. So that was pretty exciting. Yeah. I took a picture of the big, the selfie for the big smile.
The selfie. Yeah. I mean, you must have felt so victorious to find that.
I was just going around studying it, totally so excited, and then called Chris, had her come over and take a look. My wife, and it was exciting.
So now that you've begun to locate these colonies, do you go and visit them during the year to check up on them?
That colony never got back. I went back in March, and I didn't see any activity. I'm thinking they didn't make it.
Oh.
Yeah, and when I saw them, I thought, this doesn't look like a good place. I mean, a bear could come along and get into it easily. We have bears up there. And we had a bear in the area on the next bee hunt that I went on. So
this always makes me think about, as humans, we fuss a lot about how we set up our hives. And we want them facing a specific direction under specific light conditions, so many feet off the ground. But when we look at wild colonies, they don't seem to have that same guidebook of conditions that must be met.
Yeah, and so I think sometimes they make, they know how to judge a cavity size, but they don't. I don't think they judge some other aspects. There was actually, I found down low, there was another entrance in. Some bees were going in low, and there was a big entrance where this rotted wood was that they'd put a lot of propolis in there. But it was like, to me, it seemed like that's like a big top entrance. And so I was wondering, how are they going to hold any heat in there? And we had a heck of a winter up there too. In February, we had like over 5 feet of snow and a whole month of, it was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyways.
Wow. Okay. So looking forward for this season, are there some things that you're going to do differently now that you've got a full season of bee hunting under your belt?
Oh, yeah. So I have 3 or 4 other club members that are building the boxes. I've made some instructional videos.
You've assembled an army.
And yes. And in January, I put out a sign-up list. Do you want to go on a field trip bee hunting? And I had 20 people signed up. So
incredible.
We're going to do a bunch of bee hunting. I'm kind of curious to get into some of these remote areas. There's out on the coast side of the peninsula, there's some remote areas. I think it'd be fun to get in there. And like
for a venture like that, would it be like a camping excursion as well, or would you do a full day and then come back the next day, or maybe a few days later?
I haven't done any camping because of my location. Doing hunts, I can just load up the backpack and be gone for the day, and then come back. But that would be fun to do. Like, okay, we're going to do like a 2 or 3 day backpacking trip, and if I can find someone that's real familiar with, say, like the Hoh rainforest and some of those, I'm just curious about, are there wild bees out there where they get 12 feet of rain every year? But anyways, we're just going to let it develop and see who wants to go and who knows. You need to be able to find honeybees on flowers, and fireweed is probably the main one, because into July, August, September is definitely a dearth, and there's not. But we do have the fireweed, and so catching bees off the fireweed. So
do you think that maybe is the best time of year to do it, because you can get real specific about what the flowers you're looking at? I haven't tried like springtime.
Yeah. I think if there's a good flow on, then it's going to be hard to get bees to recruit to a bee box.
Yeah.
And they kind of they do the math, like if maple trees are in full bloom, they're probably not going to, so it, but there's a lot about that. I've read a lot, but that doesn't mean I really know a lot until you go out there and start doing stuff.
Yeah. Well, you're on a really exciting journey, and I thank you so much for coming and sharing your tales with us. And perhaps you'll inspire some of our listeners to get into the art of beelining.
I hope so. And one thing I didn't mention is, Dr. Seeley, in his book, Following the Wild Bees, he also talks about urban beelining. And so you don't necessarily have to be out in the wild and go find a colony. You can catch some bees and paint them and time them. And, you could get your lawn chair.
Some beekeeper in the neighborhood is like,
yeah, you could map
why
out
is
all
my bee pink?
Yeah, you could map out all the neighborhood. Yeah, sure.
Oh.
It doesn't hurt them. It was funny, because I was catching so many bees right out of my herb garden. I'd be like 3 days later, I'd come back and those bees, some of those painted bees were coming back, and I'd catch them again. And then I have a neighbor that's like not next to me, like I have like two neighbors down, which is, these are all like 1, 2, 5 acre properties. And she was out in her yard one day and she said, "Rex, there was a bee with a blue thorax in my garden."
You're like teenagers. Yeah, they're like always dyeing their hair and stuff.
Right. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, it doesn't hurt them to paint. So the other thing, my video is about building a wooden bee box, but that's a big project and most people are not going to be able to do that. So another thing I want to do to be able to design a real simple box made out of like like an orange juice carton or something like that, where you can just get some glue and scissors and cut it up and have your 2-chamber box. And so anybody could do it, because then doesn't have to be like just carpenters that are building bee boxes and going hunting. It could be anybody can do it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been a blast coming down here. I love the club. And,
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
To learn more about Rex and the art of beelining, check out my blog at waggleworkspdx.com and be sure to subscribe to his YouTube channel called Wild Project. It's loaded with videos that demonstrate the processes that we talked about today. Are you enjoying the show? Consider becoming a patron. For as little as $1 a month, you can support the work that I do with this podcast. Visit patreon.com/Mandy Shaw. You can also find Beekeeper Confidential on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Until next time, may the buzz be with you. Beekeeper Confidential is a Waggleworks production and is written and produced by Mandy Shaw.
Okay, I'm going to bump you up just a little bit.
I might need to be bumped up a little bit.
I'm bumping you up, man. You're getting bumped.